If you'd ask any tradesman, mechanic, carpenter, contractor, and they'll attest that the secret to accomplishing the job with the most efficiency and the least amount of stress and frustration is often found within having access to and the utilization of the correct tools for the job. And I think the same could be said of those who are teaching the gospel overseas. And so today, I want to spend just a few minutes sharing with you some of the tools that I use when teaching the gospel abroad. Hello, welcome to the channel. My name is Dan, and I'm so glad that you stopped by. As you saw in the intro, a couple years ago, I moved my family from the U.S. to the West African country of Sierra Leone. My family are Christians, and we're passionate about the command that Jesus gives to make disciples of all nations. And we know that's an impossible thing for us to accomplish on our own. However, we can do what we can, and that's what we're trying to do here. And that mentality is what's led us to relocate to Sierra Leone. And one of the challenges that we've faced since relocating here for the purpose of teaching the gospel and making disciples is trying to follow in the Apostle Paul's footsteps of being all things to all men. Oftentimes we come with the gospel, but we also come with a Western or foreign form of communication and transmission of that gospel. And so since moving to Sierra Leone, we've realized that people here, they learn in a different manner, a different style. One of those realities is that the people here are not as trained and skilled and experienced in learning via literary methods. A lot of them are non-readers. And so the challenge has been for us, how do we teach the gospel, which is contained and preserved through a book, to people who don't read, or people that are not as skilled in reading. That's not obviously true of everyone, but the majority of people that we come in contact with, that would be true of. And so today I'll be sharing 3 different tools or teaching aids that I use almost on a daily basis as I attempt to teach the gospel to people in a way that's memorable, in a way that's understandable to people that are at a little bit of a disadvantage when it comes to reading God's Word and following along in their own Bibles. And maybe one thing I'll share before I get into it here is that the tools that I'm using are very simple. I try to avoid using teaching aids and tools that are inaccessible to the people that I'm teaching. I'd like to teach in a way that would be replicatable to the people that I'm teaching so that they're able to impart the same stories and information that I'm teaching them and using the same methods that I'm using to teach them. And so a PowerPoint projector would not be super helpful here, even if I was able to find a way of powering it, just because no one else is going to be able to have access to that or utilize that, or at least very few people. So although they might not have access to the exact same things, they'll be able to use similar types of things as they are retelling the information that they've been taught by me and others. The first item I'll share with you all was brought to us by a couple, friend of us, a middle-aged couple that came and visited us in Sierra Leone for a couple weeks to build us up as well as to contribute to the kingdom work being done here. We did not ask for these. They weren't by request, but rather it was brought to us as a thoughtful gift. And I'm not exactly sure what was the intended use for these things. Perhaps she thought that we would use these exclusively for teaching children. My wife sewed the bag, so I'll give her credit for that one. But what these are their little, see if I can show you here, little peg people, little painted peg people. And these are just extremely helpful when it comes to teaching narrative, when it comes to teaching stories. One more challenging aspects of teaching non-readers the Bible is teaching them these sections of narrative that have a lot of characters and a lot of locations. And so being able to actually point to a physical representation of a particular character, and every time that character comes up in the story, I'm able to point or kind of lift that person up as I place them all down on a bench, is this extremely helpful, especially since the fact that all these characters in the Bible, for the most part, have these kind of unfamiliar names. They're kind of harder to remember anyways. And so instead of just trying to rely upon the quick memorization of people to remember things that are just brand new for them, being able to have, again, a physical representation of every character, and I can have them kind of move, on the bench as they come together, they go apart, they kind of interact with one another, and at the end of the story, they're able to remember all these different characters. I'm able to point to one peg person here and ask them, okay, who's this one? Who's this one? Who's this one? How did this one, and they're able just to be able to kind of from memory pull it off. And so there's about maybe 20 or 30 of these peg people in here of all different ages, white hair and black hair and brown, beard, no beard, men and women, kids. My only complaint is that there are not enough grumpy faces. I think I'd like more grumpy looking guys. It's always challenging when telling a story when there's a lot of bad, evil, wicked characters, and the people I'm using to represent them have smelly faces, and so maybe I'll make a request for someone to paint some more bad guys for me for a future addition to my collection. But these are extremely helpful in teaching children, but also teaching adults. I use this in adult Bible classes with people that are in their 40s and 50s and 60s, and I think it's just extremely helpful. Again, they might not be able to find these exact same types of things as they are retelling these stories, but anyone can find just an item and maybe draw a smiley face or a frowny face on it and then put it before someone as they're telling the story. And so again, I think I'm teaching in a way that not only is helpful in aiding them in remembering and understanding the story, but also in a way that they can then imitate when they are teaching other people. So it's a win-win. Okay, so I told you that the most challenging aspects of teaching a narrative to a oral learner is going to be the characters and the locations. And so the first item I shared certainly helps with the characters. The second thing is going to help us a lot with the locations. And so this is super simple. So all this is just something I'm able to print off in my computer of various different locations. And then I'm able to kind of stand these up. I kind of cut them and bend them in half so that they're able to stand up on the bench or a table or even just the ground that I'm using, and be able to kind of take the characters from one location to another or kind of describe the relationship between the different places. These are just leftovers from a Bible class I taught from the book of Ruth. And so Judah experienced a great famine. That was the explanation for why Naomi's family traveled to Moab, which in contrast to the famine is green and full of food. But then, obviously, after there was tragedy in that family, Naomi heard that there was crops and there was vegetation in the land. The Lord had blessed Judah. And so then they traveled from Moab back to Judah. And so again, this is very simple, but just being able to, as I'm introducing new cities, new locations, new countries, new empires, being able to have something I'm able to point to or actually take those characters or those peg people and kind of take them from one place to another place and kind of describe the relationship between them is just extremely helpful. You could do this more simply than this. I already have this program, this app on my iPad called Canva. And on Canva, there is a database of different images that are free licensing with the app. So I just entered the word field or crop, and images like this came up. And so I just kind of clicked it and dragged it and then put a title on the bottom here. I think this one was drought or famine or something to that effect. And so it has a huge database of images that you're able to use. That's what I use. Certainly there are other options for you. Google's your friend when it comes to this kind of things. But again, just having a physical representation to be able to help people as they're trying to remember cities and regions and names that are unfamiliar, that are foreign, hard to pronounce even, is a huge blessing in teaching oral learners here. All right, and for number 3, this is super simple, super self-explanatory. This is just a dry erase clipboard that I keep with me always. This lives in my backpack, and I'll usually have at least 1 or 2 dry erase markers, a cloth to wipe it off. This is just super helpful whenever I'm studying and teaching. Maybe I don't know exactly what the person I'm teaching will be hung up on or will be difficult or what questions they'll have. And so I'm not always able to come with a printed chart or a pre-developed chart. And so oftentimes in the moment, I'm able to illustrate something or draw something, or there's something there that they're having a hard time visualizing. What is that? What does that look like? then I'm able to draw or illustrate this in a very easy, simple way on the dry erase board. And so this is super helpful for, obviously, if the person I'm teaching is literate, then being able to write bullet points for what we're studying, what we're teaching, that he can then copy into his own notebook. I prefer that versus just giving them a page that they've not had to copy. I think it's easier for someone to remember if they've been able to develop that and write that down. But then in addition to that, also just being able to draw things, illustrate things, make a kind of impromptu chart as needed. And so again, this is something super simple. I bought a couple of these because I know this one will eventually deteriorate, and so I just bought a couple of them. And again, something that people here would have general access to. Ultimately, what you could just use is a marker or a pen and a piece of paper is the exact same function of this. This is just a little bit more convenient for me. So this is item number 3. As any experienced and quality teacher, I think, would agree with, these locations, characters, narratives, those aspects of God's Word are maybe not the most important thing. It's the guiding principles that they provide. It's what these teach us about God. It's about the applications and these, foundational aspects of these stories that are the most significant to our Christian lives. However, if in our Bible classes, the people that we're teaching are not picking up on the narrative, they're not understanding the characters and locations and what's happening there, then the applications and the main points that we're trying to draw from those stories and from those chapters are going to fall flat. It's going to be so much harder and so much less powerful of a thing for someone to be able to understand if there's not a grasp of, okay, I know what's happening. I know who this character is. I know what's going on in the story. I know the timeline that's been going on here. And so these tools that I'm using, I think, make that preliminary step in my Bible classes so much easier, so that when it comes to the applications, when it comes to what does it teach us about God and the gospel and these broader principles, it's so much easier to make those because everyone's already gotten the earlier part of it. And so that's what I think makes these tools and these aids so helpful in my own approach to this study. I'm really curious to hear from any of you who maybe use similar types of aids and tools in your teaching. I'd love to add to my repertoire and toolkit here, so if you don't mind, I'd love to hear from that in the comments below. I always appreciate feedback, encouragement from you all. I appreciate so much you guys taking a few minutes to listen to some of this, and by God's grace, I'll catch you in the next video.